Welcome to The Daily. I'm Niall Paterson, and on this episode, we're going to be talking about the children who are out of school more than they're in. It's a phenomenon I'm sure you've come across already. Plenty of coverage in the papers. They're known as ghost children, and there were 125,000 of them in the 2022 autumn term in England, and that is a figure that's more than doubled since the pandemic. You don't have to be a parent to wonder about the impact that the months of homeschooling have had on those children. Now, add to that statistic this one. At the beginning of the 2022 school year, 1.7 million children missed the equivalent of a morning a week at school. That's a spike of 84% and is the worst set of attendance figures for the autumn term on record. Now, as I say, there has been plenty of coverage of this phenomenon in the media, but precious little analysis of the root causes. So we sent our People in Politics correspondent Nick Martin to Blackpool to find out what has been done to get those kids back into class and what drove them out in the first place. Nick, good to have you on. Look, as mentioned, you went to Blackpool for this story. Now, the local council's pupil welfare service has been working with families with children there who've dropped off the radar at school. Tell us about that work, because it is absolutely fascinating to me.
It's a very crucial part of a community's response to low attendance and absenteeism. And the pupil welfare officers have what's called a statutory power. That means they've got similar powers to social workers. That means they can enforce the law. And remember, it's the law, Neil, to have children of school age receiving an education. And if parents don't get their kids to school, they're breaking the law. And so these pupil welfare officers, I have to say, in the department we were at, it's a minute amount of time, but they can enforce the law. And so they have power, they work hard, I've seen it up close, and their job is to monitor the attendance of every child in town, and when red flags are raised, i.e. they're not in, they go and hunt it down and ask why.
How busy are they?
They are the busiest they've ever been, according to the head of this service, Natasha Armstead, who's been in that office for 23 years. She said since the beginning of term, they've carried out 5,000 home visits to parents where there's a query about whether their kids are going to school. And that, of course, is after the pandemic. And the pandemic has had a massive impact on children's attendance. Remember, schools shut during the pandemic. They were all put onto homeschooling. And I think from what I've seen over the last few months, hundreds, if not thousands, well, definitely thousands of children have struggled to go back to school.
So where are we going?
Upstairs.
Is this where you spend most of your time? A big chunk of it?
Yeah.
And you also got to speak with one of the families the unit's working with in Blackpool, and their 13-year-old Charlie. Tell us about him.
Now, what was interesting about Charlie is just the sheer amount of time that he's missed school. In fact, he's only been in school for about 5 days in the last 2 years. He is severely absent. And when I met him, he was sitting in his bedroom doing nothing, and we sat down on his bed, and I started to ask him why he didn't like school, what it was about being at school that he didn't like.
The people, the teachers, the classes, the uniform.
Of course, I mean, a lot of kids would say that. I mean, my kids would say that if I asked them why they didn't want to go to school. But drill a little deeper, and it was clear that he had quite enjoyed the isolation, education-wise, of the pandemic. He'd enjoyed homeschooling. He doesn't like being in school. There's something there that stops him from doing it. His dad thinks it's anxiety, but the school and the reports say that he doesn't have behavioural problems. He's got a good set of friends. When he's in school, he works hard. He's attaining well. So it was really complicated to try and understand why he didn't want to go to school. But the fact is, he's missed massive chunks of school, and he is one of hundreds of thousands in the same boat.
So what are those who are trying to assist Charlie, who are trying to assist his dad, what are they actually doing to get him to school? I mean, has he gone to school? Did he go when you were there with them?
It seemed to me like there was a huge amount of what I would call gentle persuasion going on. So pupil welfare going to the home, figuring out what are the reasons, what can we do to get him back into school. The school, by all accounts, had done an awful lot. They'd tried to reduce his timetable, revise his timetable to concentrate on subjects that he likes, teach him in isolation. But they had stopped short to agree in what he wanted, which was just to be homeschooled. that is a bit of a sort of leap into the unknown for authorities. If they started doing that for Charlie, they'd have to start doing that for a whole host of children. So they very much hold the line at, really, honestly, you should be in school. But then it starts to ramp up. And ultimately, the last resort is that parents are fined. And they can even spend up to 3 months in prison. But that is a last resort. And from the work that I saw in Blackpool, a lot of it is this kind of negotiation. In fact, 3 to 5% of all their cases end up in fines. But Charlie's case was interesting, and I spoke to his nan, who, for me, had been desperately trying to get into school. Every morning she lays his uniform out on the bed. He kicks it off. She tries to get him out of bed. She even walks in with pots and pans to wake him up. I mean, she was at her wit's end. Do you think you and Dad should be doing more to get him to school?
We've dragged him in the car, crying. Dad's even lifted him out of a van at one point to put him in the gate, and he just lost his rag and ended up punching a wall.
But I also spoke to his father, James, who wanted him in school, but then admitted to me that he thought that the curriculum was too rigid, that it wasn't flexing to his son's needs. His son, he said, wanted to be a pro boxer and a businessman, had a plan A, and it felt to me like James was torn between the need to get his son into school, but kind of siding with his son's aspirations, bizarrely. And it's interesting because I asked James what his schooling was like, and he'd struggled at school. He'd been bullied. He left early without doing his exams. And so it looked to me like, history was starting to repeat itself.
Very similar, yeah, but he doesn't get bullied. He's got a lot of decent mates around him as well. So I think he just knows what he wants to do, and he's sticking to it, to be fair. So he knows exactly what he needs to do. And so far he's doing it. And he's passionate about boxing, does K1 as well. He's in the gym near enough for an hour and a half every day. I wish he was more passionate about school like that, but he knows what he wants to do and he knows what he needs.
And look, the assumption is there are so many kids just like Charlie. But Nick, give us an idea of the numbers involved in this. We've had some statistics from the government, and given devolution, I'm assuming that when we're talking figures here, we'll be specifically referring to England. Yeah.
These are England's figures, so apologies for people in the other nations. The latest figures from the Department for Education show that just over 125,000 children were out of school more than they were in for the first time for the first term in the academic year. So we've got severely absent. Charlie's severely absent. But then other persistently absent, slightly lower down, they missed the equivalent of 1 morning a week at school. Now in autumn 2022, 1.7 million children were missing the equivalent of 1 morning a week. 10%.
That's incredible. That is absolutely incredible.
And that's up 84% since the pandemic. So if you needed to understand whether this is a big issue, then you just need to look at the numbers, because this is a huge story.
Talk us then through the reasons for all of this. The numbers that you are talking about, it cannot be reflected just by persistent truants. There must be some underlying causes.
Some of the big issues that I've found that are an obstacle to attendance are things like deprivation, the cost of living, parents struggling to hold down jobs and therefore not monitoring whether their children are going to school or not. And 3 times as many children receiving free school meals are severely absent from school. So we can tell that socio-economic factors are big here. But by far the biggest cohort of absent children are those actually with special educational needs and disabilities. They're more likely than other kids to miss school. In fact, 400,000 children who were persistently absent had some form of special educational needs. So you might have a vision of the kids hanging around on the street, getting up to no good, but actually this is a critical area for children who don't seem to be able to fit into school because they might have behavioural issues, anxiety, autism, or other special educational needs. And for them and their parents, school is a tricky business to get into, and for many, they just don't fit in.
Given the number of children missing who have special educational needs, SEN, can we therefore attribute that in part to the absolutely parlous state of SEN provision and indeed mental health provision for young people?
Well, I think you can. I mean, for a lot of special educational needs pupils, they feel like school is not working for them, and actually school may not be equipped properly to deal with them, and that comes down to a lot of things, but primarily it comes down to skills in the classroom and funding. Now, during the course of researching this story, we've met children who have opted out of school, which of course parents can do as long as they provide a suitable provision for them, homeschooling, etc. We've also seen anecdotally a rise in the number of children opting out of school and joining virtual lessons by private providers online with other children around the world, taking exams outside of the state school system.
I mean, what are the schools being saying to you? Obviously, in Blackpool, you have the pupil welfare service assisting them. But what are the teachers, the head teachers, saying about the numbers of children that just simply aren't turning up for registration in the morning?
This was one of the most surprising aspects of this story when I started to sit down with head teachers who are a pragmatic, straight-talking bunch, you know. They were saying that they'd start this on the sort of focus of what is good for the child. So some head teachers said to me, some parents are lazy, some parents aren't smart enough to get their kids to school, some parents can't afford it, some parents are having mental health breakdowns, and some parents just can't physically get them to school because of distance. But what we're seeing, and I've heard this from a few head teachers now, is that in order to get some children to school, head teachers are jumping in the car in the morning, driving to the kid's house, picking them up and bringing them into school. Now, that's not sustainable. Head teachers say they can do that once or twice a week, but that is the extent of the effort that's going in to try and get some children into school. Because if they don't do that, the child is going to sit at home for all sorts of different reasons.
I want to talk more now about what the government is doing to bring these numbers down. Nick, still with us. Do you get any signal, any sign that the government appreciate the scale of the problem and that they are working towards a solution? I mean, I suppose the mantra from Whitehall would be, we are spending more money in real terms on education than ever before.
I think it's fair to say that the government has placed quite a big emphasis on this problem. I'll be fair on them for that. They recognise that all the evidence shows that when children miss school, they get worse GCSEs and by all measures do worse in life. And that can impact things like the aspiration to level up the country and even, economic growth and employment. So they see this issue as being critical. The problem is the numbers are so high post-pandemic that it's going to take a while, I think, to bring those numbers down. So what are they doing? They've been looking closely at tiny little pilots, actually, that have been going on in the country, where they've been trying to figure out a new way of encouraging children back in to school. And what they announced a couple of weeks ago is that they're going to roll out some of those pilots. They're calling them attendance hubs. I'm not actually quite sure what that means, but they're also saying that there are mentors available. I suspect that's kind of the stuff that we've been witnessing in Blackpool. Let's talk it through. How can we coax you back rather than let's fine you with big magistrates' court appearances and things like that. We'll see whether that starts to bear fruit. But as I say, there is a bit of a mountain to climb to get back to the pre-pandemic levels. The government say that they want to try and put extra money into this, although they've not really been specific about the amount. But they are definitely under pressure to do it. As I say, this is a huge problem and has huge ramifications for society if we can't get these hundreds of thousands of children back into the classroom.
OK, so let's bring in Flick Drummond, Conservative MP, member of the Education Select Committee, also used to be a lay inspector for Ofsted, so very well informed on this particular topic. Flick, good to have you on. I suppose there is a very simple question at the core of all of this. What is the problem, the issue, with so many children not attending school as regularly as they might?
Well, particularly after COVID, this is a massive problem because children are not in school or being educated at home, because that's the area that I'm also concentrating at the moment. They won't have the skills to take them through the rest of their lives. So we've got about 140,000 ghost children, which are the ones that are actually on the school roll, but they've been less in school than they're out of school. And then we've got about another between 81,000 and 115,000 children who are being home educated. But nobody knows how many they are, and the local authorities don't know either. So the ones I'm most concerned about are the ones that are being off-rolled in some cases because the school's not providing what they need. Maybe there's special educational needs, something like that. Or the ones that are being well educated, but we don't know how well they're being educated. Now, I'm not telling parents how to educate their children. Absolutely, that's not the point. But if we put up a register, the local authorities will know who they are and be able to give that support where needed or not needed.
So, Flick, you're planning to table a bill to introduce a register of children who are being homeschooled, so that at least there's some data about how many children are missing from school rolls and whether or not they're receiving any education at all. Why do we lag behind the rest of Europe in terms of the quality of the oversight that we have of our children's education?
I have no idea. But we are, as you say, an outlier in the whole of Europe. We don't know where all our children are during the school day. I mean, it is quite an extraordinary thought that we don't know what every child is doing. And there was a safeguarding panel, I think, in 2020, which had a look, and there were 15 cases of children who weren't on the radar, that were suffering harm. 3 of them were actually, 3 died. And so they're the children that we're letting down, basically, if we don't know where they are.
What are the resources required presumably by local authorities, by schools, to encourage these children back in, and not just encourage them back in for a day or two, but to keep them coming back, to keep them in education for as long as possible?
Well, I mean, the Education Select Committee are doing quite a lot of work on this. And if you look at the reasons why children go to school, it's because they find something that they're interested in. I'm very keen on an extended school day, so we can put more activities, more enrichment activities into the schools, so that where they are working and where children, where schools are providing those sort of clubs and outside type activities. So a combination of that, and I'm also, the other area that I'm personally interested in is looking at the curriculum as well and how to make that much more engaging. At the moment, we're very exam orientated, lots and lots of assessment. And do we need that, or do we need a curriculum which is going to engage children and make them ready with all those skills that you need for the workplace?
From your work, though, on the Education Committee, you will be aware that school budgets are stretched at the moment, to put it mildly.
Yeah.
Does the sort of action required to get these thousands of children, tens of thousands of children, back into education, does that not require something of a massive cash injection from central government?
It's a combination. It does need cash injection, but also schools can work within their budgets. So, for instance, the Children's Commissioner, when she was running schools in Norfolk, she had an extended school day without any further budget. So schools have to be quite clever on how they do this. But I agree. I mean, I think we are underfunded. I'm pushing the government for more money. We do need more money. I mean, this is our future. This is our future of our economy. Education is probably the most important thing that we can provide for our economy. So I'm, very, very keen to, have chats with the Chancellor, try and get more money into schools. I mean, we are putting more money than ever before, but it may be that we need to work out how to use it more effectively.
Well, let's just head back to Nick Martin for a second before we wrap up. Nick, now we have heard about those wheels in motion to identify more students and stop them slipping through the cracks. But ultimately, I mean, whose responsibility is it that children go to school every day? It's the parents. It has to be.
It's the parents' responsibility, you're right, by law, morally. But when you go into the homes of lots of parents at the moment, you can start to see that there are lots and lots of complicating factors. Some parents are really struggling. Some parents are trying to hold down jobs. Some parents can hardly pay the bills. Some parents are struggling to keep control of their children. These are daily realities. And it's the council's responsibility and a school's responsibility to try and wade through that and make sure, in the interests of the child gets into school. So if you don't spend the money and you don't support the families and rely on some parents to do it, the children will be absent from school. Full stop. Now, you could argue there is a broader debate that could be had in the years to come about the future of education, whether that's being educated in school, home, or by some other provision, whether that be online, etc. But the fact is, for thousands of children, school is still the best place. It provides a safe, constructive way of learning, and especially for vulnerable children, school is still the best place. But I think there will be a debate about education, and it is starting to hot up, and there are big questions about what education looks like in the future.
And that is your lot for The Daily for today. My thanks, of course, to Nick Martin and Flick Drummond. This episode was produced by Sydney Peat with Soila Aparicio. Our editor is Paul Stanworth.